The transmitter key felt cold under her fingertips. 3:47 in the morning. Hildegard Walter sat in the cramped hidden room behind her bedroom closet, headphones clamped tight, tapping out the final sequence of her encrypted message. Lockheed production schedules, Boeing facility locations, convoy departure times from San Pedro Harbor. Each tap sent invisible words racing across the Pacific darkness toward Hamburg. Then she heard it. A car door slamming outside. Footsteps on gravel. Her heart stopped. She froze mid-transmission, finger hovering over the brass key. Through the wall, muffled voices. Male, authoritative. Then the doorbell, harsh and insistent in the pre-dawn silence. Her hands moved on pure training. She killed the transmitter, ripped the headphones off, began disconnecting the antenna wire. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Half the message was sent. Half was not. Berlin would know something went wrong. She shoved the codebooks under a false bottom panel, locked the hidden room, and emerged into her bedroom. Her negligee stuck to her back with cold sweat. The doorbell became pounding. She forced her breathing to slow, smoothed her hair, and walked downstairs with the careful steps of someone annoyed at being woken, not terrified of being caught. Through the peephole, she saw 2 Los Angeles police officers, not FBI, not military police, just local cops. She opened the door a crack, letting confusion and irritation play across her face. "Miss Walter?" The older officer removed his cap. "Sorry to disturb you at this hour. We had reports of a disturbance in the neighborhood. Someone thought they heard breaking glass from this direction." Her mind raced. Disturbance. Breaking glass. Not radio signals. Not suspicion. Just routine patrol, following up on a neighbor's complaint. "I have heard nothing, officer," she said, her German accent thicker with manufactured sleepiness. "I was asleep until your knocking woke me." The younger cop craned his neck, trying to see past her into the house. "Mind if we take a quick look around? Just to make sure everything's secure?" Every instinct screamed danger. But refusing would create suspicion where none existed. She opened the door wider, stepping aside with a gracious smile that took enormous effort to maintain. "Of course, please come in." They walked through her living room, checked the doors and windows. One went upstairs while she stood in the foyer, fingernails digging into her palms. The transmitter was locked away. The antenna was disconnected. But if they opened the right closet, pressed the right panel, found the hidden room still warm from the equipment. "Everything looks fine, Miss Walter," the older officer called from upstairs. "No signs of forced entry." 2 minutes later, they were gone, apologizing again for the inconvenience. She closed the door, locked it, and only then did her legs start shaking. She sat on the stairs, tasting copper in her mouth from where she had bitten her cheek. That was too close, far too close. She went back upstairs, back into the hidden room, and stared at the transmitter. The incomplete message would raise questions in Hamburg. But there was no time for another transmission tonight. Not with police potentially still in the area. Not with her hands still trembling. She locked everything away and returned to bed, but sleep would not come. Instead, she reached for yesterday's Los Angeles Times, folded on her nightstand. Page 6. Small article, easy to miss. Merchant vessel lost off Philippines. SS Mariposa, carrying civilian contractors and military supplies, reported missing after departing Manila. 43 souls presumed lost at sea. Suspected Japanese submarine activity in region. She read it twice. The Mariposa. She had transmitted that ship's departure schedule 3 weeks ago. The information had come from a Navy supply officer she had met at a party in Santa Monica. A pudgy man with 3 children who showed her photos of his family while drunk on champagne and desperate for attention from a beautiful woman. 43 people. She folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside. She felt nothing. That was the point of the training, of the years of preparation. Sentiment was weakness. Guilt was failure. She was a soldier, and soldiers did not mourn enemy casualties. But she did allow herself one moment of professional satisfaction. The intelligence had been accurate. The timing had been precise. Somewhere in the Pacific, Japanese Naval Command had used her information, and American sailors had paid the price. That was victory, even if no one would ever know her name. The alarm clock showed 5:30. In 3 hours, she had a costume fitting at MGM. In 5 hours, lunch with Thomas Hendricks, senior engineer at Northrop Aviation, recently divorced, achingly lonely, and extraordinarily talkative after 2 martinis. She rose, showered, began the transformation from spy to starlet. Makeup erased the shadows under her eyes. Hair rollers created perfect platinum waves, the right dress, the right jewelry, the right smile. By 8 o'clock, Hildegard Walter looked like she had slept peacefully through the night, dreaming innocent dreams. The MGM lot bustled with controlled chaos. Directors shouted. Extras hurried between sound stages. Hildegard sat in the wardrobe department while seamstresses adjusted the gown she would wear in her next picture. A melodrama about European aristocrats fleeing to America. The irony never stopped being amusing. "You are always so still," said Marie, the head seamstress, pinning fabric at her waist. "Like a statue. Most girls, they fidget, they complain. Not you." "German discipline," Hildegard said, lightly. "My mother would slap my hands if I moved during fittings as a child." Everyone laughed. German discipline. If they only knew. Across the room, 2 young actresses gossiped about last night's party at Jack Warner's estate. One of them, a redhead named Dorothy, turned to Hildegard. "You were there, weren't you? I saw you talking to that handsome army captain. Morrison, I think? Lucky girl." Hildegard smiled. "Robert is very sweet and very dedicated to his work. What does he do?" "Something with aircraft manufacturing. Coordination between factories and military contracts. Terribly boring, but he makes it sound exciting." Dorothy laughed. "That is a gift. Most men make exciting things sound boring." The fitting ended. Hildegard had 2 hours before lunch. She drove her Packard down Wilshire Boulevard, turned north into the hills, and pulled into a nearly empty parking lot at Griffith Park. She walked to a specific bench overlooking the city, sat down, and opened a book. 15 minutes later, a man in a brown suit sat at the other end of the bench. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. He opened his own book. They sat like strangers enjoying the morning sun. "You missed the last sequence," he said quietly in German. "Hamburg is concerned." "Police came to my door during transmission," she replied, eyes on her book. "Routine disturbance call. Nothing more. Are you compromised?" "No, but it was close." The man, his name was Werner, though she suspected that was false, turned a page of his book. "You are taking too many risks. The Morrison contact, the Northrop engineer, the Douglas executive. Too many men, too many connections. Someone will notice the pattern." "Someone will notice if I suddenly stop," she countered. "I am an actress. I go to parties. I meet people. That is my cover. Changing behavior now would be more suspicious than continuing." Werner was silent for a moment. "Berlin wants more on the new bomber project. The B-17 production numbers. Any information about range, payload, targeting systems. Morrison might have access. He is becoming attached. I can push him further." "How much further?" She understood the question. How much further before he broke? Before he realized what she was? Before he went to his superiors? Or worse, to the FBI? "Far enough," she said. Werner stood, tucked his book under his arm. "There is a new priority target. Commander James Reardon, Naval Intelligence, temporarily assigned to Terminal Island Shipyard Security. He has access to convoy routing, submarine detection protocols, Pacific theater deployment schedules. Berlin considers him high value. How do I make contact?" "He will be at David Selznick's party this Saturday. Reardon is 48, married 20 years, 2 daughters. Wife is in Virginia and will not be joining him. He is lonely, he drinks bourbon, and he has a weakness for beautiful women who ask him about his service. This should be easy for you." Werner walked away without another word. Hildegard sat on the bench for 10 more minutes, staring at the city spread below. Los Angeles looked so clean from up here, so innocent. Miles of red tile roofs and palm trees and morning sunlight. None of those people down there had any idea what was being planned, what information flowed through the air above them, what machines of war were being prepared in their factories. They thought they were safe. They thought the ocean protected them. They thought the war was happening somewhere else, to other people. They were wrong. Lunch with Thomas Hendricks took place at Musso and Frank Grill on Hollywood Boulevard. Hendricks was waiting at the bar, already on his second drink. He brightened when he saw her, stood too quickly, almost knocked over his glass. "Hildegard, you look absolutely stunning." "Thomas, you are too kind." She kissed his cheek, let him pull out her chair, let him order wine she would barely touch, while he consumed 3 more martinis over the next 90 minutes. The conversation followed its predictable pattern. She asked about his work. He deflected modestly, then began talking anyway, because men always did. The new Northrop Flying Wing program was behind schedule. Labor disputes, material shortages, design challenges with the wing structure at high speeds. The Army was pushing for production acceleration, but the technology was not ready. She listened with perfect attention, asked intelligent questions at precisely the right moments, laughed at his jokes, touched his hand when he said something particularly clever. By the time dessert arrived, he was deeply drunk and utterly infatuated. "You should come see the plant sometime," he said, slurring slightly. "I could arrange a tour. We show off for movie people all the time. Good publicity. Would they really let me see the new bomber?" "For you? I would make it happen." She squeezed his hand. "Thomas, you are too good to me." He drove home after lunch, which concerned her. He was in no condition to drive. But she could not show too much concern without seeming motherly instead of romantic. She needed him infatuated, not comfortable. Desire made men reckless. Comfort made them cautious. She spent the afternoon at home photographing her notes from the Morrison and Hendricks conversations using the Minox camera. Each frame captured names, locations, numbers, technical specifications. The film went into a hollowed-out lipstick tube in her makeup case. Tomorrow Klaus would deliver it to a photo lab in Chinatown owned by an agent named Chen, who would develop the images and transmit them to San Francisco, where they would be microfilmed and sent to a Japanese diplomatic courier, who would carry them to Tokyo, where they would be forwarded to Berlin. The chain was long and complicated, but it was unbroken. Not once in 3 years had a package been lost or intercepted. That evening she attended a small dinner party at Pickfair, the legendary estate owned by Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford. 20 guests, all industry elite. Hildegard wore emerald green and sat between a Columbia Pictures executive and a general from Marchfield Air Base. The general was old, pompous, and ignored her completely to talk shop with the men. But she listened anyway, absorbing every casual mention of troop deployments, training schedules, equipment deliveries. The Columbia executive, by contrast, paid her complete attention and invited her to his beach house in Malibu for the weekend. She declined gracefully. Too many entanglements became dangerous. She had to manage the web carefully. Enough connections to maintain access, not so many that patterns emerged. After dinner, she found herself on the terrace with a woman named Elizabeth Carson, wife of a Lockheed vice president. Elizabeth was drunk and bitter, complaining about her husband's long hours at the plant. 70, 80 hours a week, Elizabeth said, lighting another cigarette with shaking hands. He comes home exhausted, won't talk about work, won't talk about anything. I asked him when it would end, and you know what he said? He said it is just beginning. That after the P-38 comes the next project, and the next, and it will not stop until the war is over. But we are not even in the war yet. We are supposed to be neutral. Perhaps he is just being cautious, Hildegard offered. Preparing in case. Preparing. Elizabeth laughed bitterly. They are building an entire second factory in Burbank, triple the size of the first. Runways, testing facilities, everything. Frank says they will be producing 200 aircraft a month by next summer. Does that sound like neutral preparation to you? 200 aircraft per month. Hildegard committed it to memory. That was significant intelligence. Production capacity projections Berlin would value highly. She left Pickfair at midnight and drove home through empty streets. The close call with police that morning should have made her cautious. Should have made her slow down, reduce activity, lower her profile. Instead, she felt energized. The danger sharpened her focus. This was what she was trained for. This was her purpose. Back home, she found an envelope that had been slipped under her door. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside, a single piece of paper with a typed message in German. Engineer Morrison found dead this morning. Apparent suicide, pills and alcohol. LAPD ruled accidental overdose. Ensure no connection to you exists. Destroy all correspondence. Her hands did not shake this time. She read the message twice, then burned it in the bathroom sink, washing the ashes down the drain. Robert Morrison, the Army captain, with access to Lockheed production schedules. The lonely married man who had been so eager to impress her. Dead. Suicide. Or made to look like suicide. She walked to her bedroom, opened the hidden room, and checked her files. She had been careful with Morrison. No written letters, no photographs together. Only public meetings at parties where dozens of others were present. There was nothing connecting them beyond casual acquaintance. But someone had killed him. Either he had been discovered and eliminated by American counterintelligence, or he had been eliminated by her own side to prevent him from becoming a liability. Either way, it sent a clear message. No one was safe. Not the sources, not even the agents. Hildegard sat on her bed in the darkness, staring at nothing. She should feel something. Fear, perhaps. Regret for the man who had died. Concern for her own safety. But she felt only cold calculation. Morrison's death meant she needed a new source for Lockheed information. It meant she needed to be more careful about operational security. It meant the game was escalating, and she needed to escalate with it. She thought about Commander Reardon, the naval intelligence officer she would meet on Saturday. She thought about the party, the introduction, the careful dance of seduction and manipulation. She thought about what information he possessed, what secrets she could extract, how far she could push him before he broke. And she thought about the 43 sailors who had died on the Mariposa, and the hundreds more who would die from intelligence she would gather in the coming months, and the thousands who would die when war finally came and the factories she was mapping became targets for German bombers. She was one woman with a camera and a radio, but she was killing people as surely as if she pulled the trigger herself. That was the truth of espionage. That was the price of loyalty. Outside her window, Los Angeles slept in the warm California night, dreaming its golden dreams, while death counted its pieces on the board and planned its next move. Hildegard Walter lay down in her expensive bed, in her beautiful house, in her perfect cover, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would smile and charm and destroy. Tomorrow she would be everything they wanted her to be. Tonight, just for a moment, she let herself wonder what it felt like to be someone else, someone innocent, someone who slept without blood on her hands. But only for a moment. Sentiment was weakness, and she could not afford to be weak. Not when the real war had not even begun. Commander James Reardon stood at the edge of David Selznick's swimming pool, bourbon in hand, watching Hollywood's elite play at being carefree while the world burned. Saturday night, 1941, and everyone pretended the war was still someone else's problem. Reardon knew better. He had seen the intelligence reports. He knew what was coming. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world," said a voice beside him. German accent, smooth as silk. "That is too much for one person, I think." He turned and found himself looking at the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Platinum blonde hair, catching the pool lights. Ice blue eyes that somehow felt warm. A smile that made him forget, just for a second, that his wife was 3,000 miles away, and he had not slept properly in weeks. "Hildegard Walter," she said, extending her hand. "I do not believe we have met." James Reardon. He shook her hand, felt the softness of her skin, the confidence in her grip. "You are an actress?" "When they let me be. Mostly I stand in the background, looking elegant, while the real stars have all the dialogue. But it pays well, and the parties are excellent." She gestured at the sprawling estate, the glittering pool, the elaborate bar, where white-jacketed servers mixed cocktails. "Although you do not look like you are enjoying this particular party very much." "Is it that obvious? You have been standing in the same spot for 20 minutes, watching everyone else, but talking to no one. Either you are terribly shy or terribly troubled. You do not strike me as shy." Reardon laughed despite himself. "Naval intelligence. We are trained to observe, not participate." Her eyes widened with what looked like genuine interest. "Naval intelligence. That sounds far more interesting than anything anyone else here does. All they want to talk about is box office numbers and which director is sleeping with which actress. Tell me something real. Tell me what a naval intelligence officer thinks about when he stands alone at parties." It was a good line. Too good. Reardon had been in intelligence long enough to recognize when someone was working him. But he was also lonely enough and drunk enough not to care. "I think about whether any of these people understand what is about to happen," he said. "Whether they have any idea that everything they take for granted is about to change. You think America will enter the war. I think America will not have a choice." Hildegard moved closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. "That must be frightening, knowing something terrible is coming and being unable to stop it. The job is not to stop it. The job is to be ready when it happens." "And are we? Ready?" He almost told her. Almost said, "No, we are not ready. Not even close. Our Pacific Fleet is vulnerable, and our intelligence networks in Asia are compromised, and we are building ships and planes as fast as we can, but it will not be fast enough." Almost told her everything he knew, because she was beautiful and sympathetic, and it felt so good to have someone actually listen. But some part of his training, some instinct honed over 20 years in naval intelligence, made him pause, made him look at her more carefully, made him notice the way she held her drink without actually drinking it, the way her questions, casual as they seemed, were all pointed in the same direction. "Why do you ask?" he said carefully. She laughed, a light musical sound. "Because I am curious. Because I am tired of talking about movies and gossip. Because you are the first interesting person I have met in weeks." She touched his arm, just briefly. "But if I am being too forward, I apologize. We have only just met." The moment of suspicion passed. She was just a beautiful woman, making conversation at a party. He was being paranoid. That was the job, too. Seeing threats everywhere, trusting no one. But sometimes a friendly conversation was just a friendly conversation. They talked for another hour. She was charming, intelligent, interested without being pushy. She told him about growing up in Munich, studying drama in Berlin, coming to America before the war made it impossible. She asked about his career, his family, what brought him to Los Angeles. He found himself relaxing, enjoying her company in a way he had not enjoyed anyone's company in months. When they finally parted, she gave him her phone number written on a cocktail napkin. "Call me," she said, "if you need someone to talk to who is not in the Navy. Sometimes it helps to have a civilian perspective, yes?" He pocketed the napkin and watched her disappear into the crowd. For the first time in weeks, James Reardon felt something other than exhausted. He felt interested, intrigued, maybe even a little hopeful. He had no idea he had just met his executioner. 3 days later, Hildegard sat in a cramped office above a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, watching Chen develop the photographs she had taken of documents stolen from Thomas Hendricks's briefcase. The Northrop engineer had invited her to his apartment for dinner. He had drunk too much wine. He had fallen asleep on the couch. She had spent 15 minutes photographing everything in his briefcase with the Minox camera, then woken him gently and let him drive her home, believing nothing had happened except a pleasant evening cut short by exhaustion. Chen worked in silence, his hands steady in the chemical baths. He was 62, a first-generation immigrant who had been recruited by the Abwehr through connections in Shanghai. He ran a photography studio as cover, doing passport photos and wedding portraits for the Chinese community while processing espionage film in his darkroom. Good quality, he said finally, hanging the wet prints to dry. Very clear. Hamburg will be pleased. Hildegard studied the images. Technical schematics of the Northrop Flying Wing, production schedules, material requisition forms, testing protocols, everything Berlin needed to understand American bomber development. How long until transmission? She asked. 2 days. San Francisco courier leaves Thursday. She nodded. The system worked. It had worked for 3 years. Dozens of agents, each knowing only their small piece of the operation. Photographers, couriers, radio operators, handlers, a web that stretched from Los Angeles to San Francisco, to Tokyo, to Berlin, passing intelligence through so many hands that no single arrest could compromise the entire network. But Morrison's death had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Dead men could not be interrogated, but they could be investigated. If American counterintelligence was looking at Morrison, they might look at everyone he had contact with, including her. Have you heard anything about increased FBI activity? She asked Chen. He shrugged. Nothing unusual. They watch the ports. They watch the consulates. They watch known German nationals. But there are 50,000 Germans in Los Angeles. They cannot watch everyone. And Japanese nationals? Chen's face hardened. The pressure is increasing. More registration requirements. More surveillance. There is talk of internment if war comes. The community is frightened. Hildegard felt a flicker of concern. If Japanese Americans were being targeted, the courier networks, through Japanese diplomatic channels, would collapse. That would force everything through alternative routes. Riskier, slower, more vulnerable to interception. Tell your people to be careful, she said. Tell yours the same. She left through the back entrance, down a narrow alley that smelled of garbage and cooking oil, and emerged onto Broadway. Her Packard was parked 3 blocks away. She never parked close to Chen's studio, never created patterns, never made the same approach twice. But as she walked, she felt the prickle of surveillance. Nothing obvious. No one following too close. Just a feeling, an instinct that someone was watching. She stopped at a shop window, using the reflection to scan the street behind her. Pedestrians, shoppers, businessmen. No one obviously out of place. But the feeling persisted. She continued walking, took a sudden right turn down a side street, stopped again. Waited. No one followed. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was paranoia, the natural result of Morrison's death and 3 years of living a double life. Or maybe the walls were closing in and she just could not see them yet. That evening she met Werner at their usual spot, a bench in Griffith Park overlooking the city. The sun was setting, turning the sky purple and gold. Below them, Los Angeles spread out like a glowing circuit board, lights beginning to flicker on as darkness fell. Reardon made contact, she said without preamble. I have his phone number. He is interested. How interested? Interested enough. He is lonely, he is stressed, and he wants someone to talk to. I can work with that. Werner handed her an envelope. Background file. Everything we know about him. Use it carefully. He is more experienced than Morrison. He will be harder to manipulate. She opened the envelope, scanned the contents. James Reardon, 48 years old, 23 years in naval intelligence, decorated service in the First World War. Currently assigned to Pacific Fleet Security Coordination. Wife Margaret, daughters Helen and Patricia. Protestant, Republican, non-drinker, except socially. Weaknesses, loneliness, stress, desire for recognition, frustrated by bureaucratic incompetence. What specifically does Berlin want from him? She asked. Everything he knows about convoy routing in the Pacific, submarine detection protocols, naval dispositions in Hawaii and the Philippines, fleet movements, supply chains, communication systems. Reardon has access to all of it. That is a lot to extract without raising suspicion. That is why Berlin sent you instead of someone else. You are the best we have. It should have felt like a compliment. Instead, it felt like pressure, like a noose tightening. She was delivering results, but results created expectations, and expectations demanded more results, and eventually she would be asked to do something impossible, and the whole structure would collapse. Morrison's death, she said carefully. Was that us or them? Werner was silent for a long moment. Does it matter? It matters if we are cleaning up our own loose ends. It matters if I need to worry about becoming a loose end. You are not a loose end. You are an asset. The most valuable asset we have in California. That is not an answer. Werner stood, preparing to leave. Be careful with Reardon. Do not rush him. Do not push too hard. We have time. Do we? Hildegard looked at him directly. Because it feels like time is running out. Werner walked away without responding, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Hildegard sat alone on the bench, watching the city lights multiply as night fell. Somewhere down there, James Reardon was having dinner, or reading reports, or missing his family. Somewhere down there, FBI agents were tracking leads and building cases and getting closer. Somewhere down there, the machinery of war was grinding forward, unstoppable and inevitable. And she was caught in the middle of it, pretending to be someone she was not, killing people she would never meet, serving a cause she believed in, but sometimes late at night could not quite remember why. Her phone rang 2 days later. Miss Valter, this is James Reardon. We met at David Selznick's party. Commander Reardon, she said warmly. What a pleasant surprise. I wondered if you might like to have dinner, tonight, if you are free. I know it is short notice. Tonight is perfect. I would love to. They met at Perino's on Wilshire, one of the city's finest restaurants. He wore civilian clothes, a well-cut suit that made him look younger than 48. She wore navy blue, elegant, but not provocative. This was not seduction. Not yet. This was building trust. Over dinner, he talked more freely than at the party. The bourbon helped. So did her attention, her questions, her seemingly genuine interest in his work. He told her about the challenges of coordinating security across multiple commands, the frustration of dealing with bureaucrats who did not understand urgency, the loneliness of being stationed 3,000 miles from family. Margaret does not understand why I took this assignment, he said, working on his third drink. She thinks I volunteered to get away from her. But it is not that. It is that someone has to do this work, and I have the experience. If I do not do it, it will be done badly, and people will die. That is a heavy burden, Hildegard said softly. It is the job. But who takes care of you while you are taking care of everyone else? He looked at her, and she saw the loneliness there, the exhaustion, the hunger for connection. No one, he said quietly. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. That is not fair. Even heroes need someone to talk to. It was a calculated move, perfectly timed. Not too forward, not too intimate, just the right amount of sympathy and interest, just enough to make him feel seen. They had dinner 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Each time he opened up a little more. Each time she learned a little more. Not classified information yet. He was too careful for that. But context, names, relationships, weak points in the security structure, places where information might be vulnerable. On their 5th dinner, he invited her to his apartment in Santa Monica. It was a modest place, military neat, almost sterile. No photographs of his family, no personal touches, just a man living in temporary quarters, waiting for real life to resume. They sat on his couch, drinking coffee. He had stopped drinking alcohol around her, as if afraid of what he might say while drunk. They talked about inconsequential things, movies, books, her childhood in Munich, his in Ohio. Then she asked casually, "When do you think it will happen? The war?" He sighed. "Soon. Weeks, maybe. Months at most." "How can you be so sure?" "Because of where the pieces are on the board. Because of what we are seeing in the Pacific. Because war is not something that happens suddenly. It is something that builds slowly until the weight becomes unbearable and everything collapses." "That sounds like you are describing an avalanche." "It is exactly like an avalanche. The snow piles up, layer after layer, and everyone sees it happening, but no one does anything, because maybe it will be fine, maybe it will hold. Until one day, a single snowflake lands in the wrong place, and the whole mountain comes down." She moved closer to him on the couch, not touching, but close. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of the war itself, of what happens if we are not ready, of what happens if the intelligence is wrong or the preparations are inadequate, or someone makes a mistake that costs thousands of lives." "You are one person, James. You cannot carry all of that alone." "I know, but I do not know how to stop." She kissed him then, gently, briefly. When she pulled back, he looked stunned. "I am sorry," she said. "That was inappropriate." "No," he said quickly. "It was not. I am married. I should not." "You are a man who is lonely and exhausted and doing impossible work with no support. You deserve one moment of comfort. That is all it has to be. One moment." He kissed her back, harder this time, desperate and hungry. She let him, controlled the pace, made sure it went exactly far enough and no further. When it ended, they sat together in silence, his head on her shoulder, her hand stroking his hair. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For caring. For making me feel like a human being instead of just a rank and a set of responsibilities." She held him and said nothing, and thought about 43 sailors on the Mariposa, and the thousands more who would die from information she would extract from this broken, lonely man. 2 weeks later, James Reardon gave her access to classified convoy schedules without even realizing he had done it. They were at his apartment again, late at night, lying in his bed after finally crossing the line they had both known they would cross. He was half asleep, comfortable, unguarded. She asked about his day. He mentioned a headache, a long meeting about convoy security in the Philippines. He laughed bitterly about bureaucrats who did not understand the threat. He mentioned specific convoy designations, Charlie 7, Delta 3, and departure dates and routes, just talking, just venting frustration to the one person who seemed to understand. She memorized every word. The next morning she transmitted it all to Hamburg via coded message delivered through Chen's network. She included detailed notes about Reardon's access level, his vulnerabilities, how much further he could be pushed. Berlin's response came 3 days later through Werner. Outstanding work. Continue developing Reardon source. Priority intelligence target. Exercise extreme caution. Exercise extreme caution. She almost laughed. There was no caution left to exercise. She was sleeping with a naval intelligence officer, stealing classified information, and operating in a city where FBI counterintelligence was actively hunting German agents. The only question was whether she would complete her mission before the trap closed, or whether she was already caught and just did not know it yet. December 7th, 1941, started like any other Sunday morning in Los Angeles. Hildegard woke at 9, made coffee, and sat in her garden reading the newspaper, while morning sunlight filtered through the jacaranda trees. The city was quiet, peaceful, suspended in that lazy weekend stillness where nothing urgent seemed possible. Then the phone rang. "Turn on your radio." It was Werner, his voice tight with something she had never heard from him before. Not excitement, fear. She went inside, switched on the Philco radio in her living room. It took a moment to warm up, tubes glowing, then a voice cut through the static. "Attacking Pearl Harbor. Repeat. Japanese forces are attacking the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Multiple ships reported hit. Casualties unknown, but believed to be extensive. This is not a drill. We repeat, this is not a drill." Hildegard stood frozen, coffee cup forgotten in her hand. Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Fleet. The attack they had known was coming, but not when, not where, not like this. Everything just changed. The phone rang again. James Reardon, his voice ragged with exhaustion and something close to panic. "Hildegard, I cannot talk long. I am being recalled immediately. I just wanted you to know. I do not know when I will see you again. Things are going to move very fast now." "James, are you safe?" "For now." "But Hildegard, listen to me carefully. Do not try to contact me. Do not come to my office. Do not ask questions about what I am doing. The security environment is about to become extremely hostile for anyone with foreign connections. Do you understand?" "I understand. I have to go. I am sorry. For everything." He hung up. She stood holding the dead phone, her mind racing through implications. Pearl Harbor meant war. War meant martial law, security crackdowns, FBI sweeps of foreign nationals, internment camps for enemy aliens. War meant the casual tolerance that had allowed her to operate for 3 years would evaporate overnight. War meant the hunt was about to begin in earnest, and she was the prey. She called the studio, reached her agent. "MGM is shutting down for the day," he told her. "Everyone is. The whole city is in shock. Stay home, stay safe. We will figure out what comes next." She hung up and immediately began destroying evidence. Not everything. That would take too long and create its own suspicions if someone searched her house. But the most damaging items, certain photographs, certain notes, code books she had memorized anyway. She burned them in the fireplace, ground the ashes to powder, flushed them down multiple drains throughout the house. The shortwave transmitter stayed hidden. She might still need it. But she disconnected the external antenna, wiped down all surfaces for fingerprints, prepared the hidden room so it could be sealed and concealed within minutes, if necessary. By noon, the streets were chaos. People gathered in clusters, listening to radios through shop windows. Newsboys shouted headlines. Long lines formed at recruiting stations. The shock was giving way to rage, and the rage was looking for targets. Hildegard stayed inside, curtains drawn, monitoring radio broadcasts. The casualty reports grew worse with each update. 18 ships damaged or destroyed. Over 2,000 dead. The Pacific Fleet crippled. America was in the war now, whether it wanted to be or not, and everyone would be looking for spies. That night, Werner came to her house directly, a violation of every security protocol they had established. He looked haggard, 20 years older than 3 days ago. "We are compromising networks," he said without preamble. "Shutting down operations, destroying evidence, preparing for arrests. Berlin's orders. Everything non-essential goes dark immediately." Am I non-essential? You are the opposite. Berlin wants you operational as long as possible. But that might not be very long. FBI is already rounding up German nationals. Japanese internment is coming. Anyone with Axis connections will be investigated. I am an American citizen, through my mother. That will buy you time, not immunity. They will look at everyone. He handed her a new set of identity papers. Emergency credentials, Canadian passport, different name. If you need to run, these will get you to Mexico, then to South America. We have networks there. She looked at the passport. The photograph was hers, taken months ago without her knowledge. The name was Sarah Mitchell, born in Toronto. The cover story would be flimsy under serious investigation, but it might hold long enough to get across the border. "What about the rest of the network?" she asked. "Chen is already gone. Left for San Francisco this morning. The courier networks through Japanese channels are completely collapsed. We are down to radio transmission only, and even that is being monitored more heavily now. The Navy has direction-finding equipment. They will be scanning for unauthorized transmissions, triangulating locations. So I am cut off. You are isolated. There is a difference. You still have the transmitter. You still have your contacts. But you are operating without support now. If something goes wrong, we cannot extract you." Hildegard absorbed this. 3 years of careful infrastructure, gone in a single morning. She was alone in enemy territory with no backup and diminishing options. "How long do I continue?" she asked. "Until they catch you, or until Berlin recalls you? Whichever comes first." Werner moved toward the door, then stopped. "Morrison was not suicide. I can tell you that now. He was compromised. He was going to talk. We made sure he could not." The confirmation of what she had suspected should have shocked her. Instead, she felt only cold clarity. "And if I am compromised? Then I suggest you use those identity papers before we make the same decision about you." He left. She locked the door behind him, secured the house, and sat in darkness, trying to process the new reality. The game had changed. The rules were different. She was playing against a fully mobilized American counterintelligence apparatus that would be ruthless and efficient and motivated by rage at Pearl Harbor. She thought about running. Mexico was 2 hours south. She could be across the border by dawn, on a ship to Argentina within a week, safe in Buenos Aires, while the war played out thousands of miles away. But that would mean abandoning her mission, abandoning Germany, proving that she was exactly what they would call her, a traitor, a coward, someone who ran when things got difficult. She was not ready to run. Not yet. The next morning, FBI agents came to her house, 2 men in dark suits, badges held out, polite but firm. "Miss Walter?" We need to ask you some questions. May we come in?" She let them in, playing the confused and cooperative citizen. They sat in her living room, pulling out notebooks, asking about her background, her family in Germany, her activities in Los Angeles, her associations with other German nationals. "We are speaking with all German citizens and American citizens of German descent," the older agent explained. "Standard security protocols given current events. Nothing to be concerned about if you have been cooperative." "Of course," she said. "I understand completely. I am as horrified by the attack as anyone. My loyalties are entirely with America." "How often do you communicate with family in Germany?" "I have not had contact since 1939. Mail service is impossible now with the war in Europe." "Do you know any other German nationals in Los Angeles?" She gave them names. People from the German-American social clubs, the cultural organizations, all public associations that would be in records anyway. Nothing that would compromise operational networks. "Have you ever been asked to provide information about military installations or defense industries?" "Never. I am an actress. I go to parties and auditions. That is the extent of my life here." They asked about travel, about finances, about relationships. She answered everything smoothly, maintaining perfect calm while her heart hammered against her ribs. They were fishing. They did not have anything specific, but they were building files, cataloging connections, looking for patterns. After 40 minutes, they stood to leave. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Walter. We may have follow-up questions. Please remain available and notify us if you plan to travel outside Los Angeles." "Of course, whatever I can do to help." She closed the door behind them and immediately went to the bathroom and vomited. The fear she had suppressed during the interview came flooding back, overwhelming and paralyzing. They were building a case. Maybe not against her specifically, but against someone, and any investigation could stumble across her by accident. One wrong connection, one careless word from a source, one piece of evidence that survived her purge, and the entire structure would collapse. She rinsed her mouth, splashed cold water on her face, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked back, beautiful, composed, untouchable. The mask was still intact. She could still do this. James Reardon called 3 days later. "I have 15 minutes. Can I see you?" They met at a small cafe in Santa Monica, far from military installations or anywhere they might be recognized. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, eyes red from lack of sleep. "It is chaos," he said quietly. "Complete chaos. Half the Pacific Fleet is at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. We have no real-time intelligence about Japanese positions. Everyone is scrambling to figure out what happens next." "I am so sorry, James. The worst part is we should have seen it coming. There were indicators, pieces of intelligence, but we did not put them together fast enough, did not take the threat seriously enough, and now thousands of men are dead because we failed." She took his hand across the table. "That is not your fault. I was responsible for threat assessment. It is exactly my fault." He laughed bitterly. "They are talking about court-martials for the commanders at Pearl, as if punishing people will bring back the dead or fix what broke. What happens now? For you? I am being reassigned. Pacific Fleet Coordination, working out of San Diego. I leave in 4 days." 4 days. She had 4 days to extract whatever intelligence he still had access to. 4 days before he disappeared into military security protocols that would make contact impossible. "Can I see you again before you go?" she asked. "I should not. Security is tighter than anything I have ever seen. Everyone is being watched. Phone lines are monitored. Mail is censored. They are terrified of more attacks, more intelligence leaks. One dinner, please, just to say goodbye properly." He hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow night. But it has to be somewhere private." "Your house?" "My house," she agreed. He came at 8, carrying a briefcase he should not have brought, drinking whiskey he should not have drunk. The stress had broken something in him. He was talking too much, caring too little about security protocols, desperate for human connection in a world that had suddenly become hostile and terrifying. They had dinner. They drank. They ended up in her bedroom, and afterward, while he slept, she went through his briefcase with methodical precision. Fleet dispositions in San Diego, convoy schedules for supply runs to Australia, submarine patrol routes, communication frequencies, damage assessments from Pearl Harbor. Everything was there, everything she needed, and he had brought it directly to her because he was lonely and traumatized and could not see past his own pain. She photographed 23 pages of classified documents with the Minox camera. Then she carefully replaced everything exactly as it had been, returned to bed, and lay awake next to him while he slept, thinking about what she had just done. This was not seduction anymore. This was not even espionage. This was something darker. She had taken a broken man and exploited his weakness at the moment when he was most vulnerable. She had weaponized his trust and turned his humanity against him. In the morning, he left early, kissed her goodbye, promised to write when he could. She watched him drive away, knowing she had just destroyed his life. When the intelligence she stole was used against American forces, when the investigations traced the leak back to him, when they realized classified documents had been compromised at exactly the time he was seeing a German-American woman, he would be arrested, court-martialed, possibly executed for treason. And he had done nothing wrong except be human, except need comfort, except trust the wrong person. She transmitted the intelligence that night using the shortwave radio, knowing it might be the last time, knowing that Navy direction-finding equipment might already be triangulating her signal, knowing that every transmission was a gamble with death. The message took 6 minutes to send. When it was finished, she disassembled everything, sealed the hidden room, and sat in her dark house, waiting for sirens. They did not come that night, or the next night, but she could feel them getting closer, feel the walls contracting, feel time running out. On December 15th, 8 days after Pearl Harbor, FBI agents arrested Werner. She learned about it from a brief item in the newspaper. German national detained on suspicion of espionage. No name given, but she knew. Werner was gone, which meant the network had another hole in it, another potential point of compromise. On December 17th, she received a coded message through an emergency dead drop, a hollow space behind a loose brick in a wall near Union Station. The message was brief. Cease all operations. Destroy all evidence. Prepare for extraction or deep cover. This is final communication. Berlin was pulling the plug. The mission was over. She should have felt relief, should have felt the weight lifting. Instead, she felt only emptiness. 3 years of work, hundreds of intelligence reports, dozens of sources cultivated and exploited, and it was ending not with triumph, but with frantic retreat. That night, she burned the rest of her operational materials, the code books, the contact lists, the backup identity papers. Everything except the Canadian passport and $5,000 in emergency cash. She packed a small suitcase with essential clothes and documents. She prepared her house to look like someone planning to return, not someone running for the border. But before she could leave, the phone rang one last time. Hildegard? It was not a voice she recognized. Male, American accent, calm and professional. We need to talk. Tomorrow noon, the bench at Pershing Square. Come alone, this is not optional. The line went dead. She stood holding the phone, her blood ice in her veins. That was not a friend. That was not an ally. That was the voice of someone who knew exactly what she was and had decided it was time to bring her in. The FBI had found her. The question was whether they had found her in time to prove anything or whether she still had a chance to run. She looked at the suitcase by the door, looked at the clock, showing 11:47 at night, looked at the Mexican border 2 hours south, where freedom waited if she moved fast enough. But she also looked at the phone, at the voice that had just commanded her attendance, and she knew that running now would be an admission of guilt, would turn suspicion into certainty, would end any possibility of talking her way out. She had one move left, one gamble, one final performance where everything depended on her ability to convince the audience she was exactly what she pretended to be. She would go to the meeting. She would look them in the eye. And she would lie with more conviction than she had ever lied before. Because the alternative was a bullet or a noose, and Hildegard Walter was not ready to die. Not yet. Not when the real war had just begun. Pershing Square at noon looked like a postcard of normalcy. Office workers eating lunch on benches, pigeons fighting over breadcrumbs, sunshine filtering through palm trees, the kind of scene that made you forget the country was at war, that the Pacific Fleet lay shattered at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, that the world had fundamentally changed 8 days ago. Hildegard sat on the designated bench, hands folded in her lap, posture perfect, every inch the composed actress, but her heart hammered against her ribs, and her mouth tasted like copper. A man sat down beside her, mid-40s, brown suit, unremarkable face. He did not look at her directly, just gazed out at the park like any other person enjoying a lunch break. "Miss Walter?" he said quietly. "My name is Special Agent Richard Coleman, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Thank you for coming. You said it was not optional. That is correct." He turned to face her now, and his eyes were intelligent and cold. "We have been watching you for some time, you and several of your associates. We know about Captain Morrison. We know about Commander Reardon. We know about your meetings with Thomas Hendricks from Northrop Aviation and Elizabeth Carson from Lockheed. We know about the photography studio in Chinatown run by a man named Chen, who disappeared on December 8th. We know a great deal, Miss Walter." She kept her face neutral, but something inside her went ice cold. They knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to have been building a case. Enough to have been watching while she thought she was invisible. "I go to parties," she said carefully. "I meet many people. That is part of working in Hollywood. If some of those people work in defense industries, that is hardly unusual in Los Angeles right now." "Indeed? Very reasonable explanation." Coleman smiled without warmth. "Which is why we would like you to come to our office and help us understand these connections more clearly. Voluntarily, of course, unless you would prefer we make it official." It was not a question. It was not even really a threat. It was a statement of fact. She could walk to the FBI office with him now, or she could be arrested and dragged there. Either way, she was going. "I have nothing to hide," she said. "I am happy to cooperate." "Excellent. My car is across the street." The Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in downtown Los Angeles occupied 3 floors of a nondescript government building. Coleman led her through security, upstairs, down a corridor lined with closed doors, behind which she could hear typewriters and telephone conversations. Everything looked normal, bureaucratic, almost boring. But she could feel the machinery of investigation grinding all around her, inexorable and patient. They put her in a small interview room. Table, 3 chairs, bare walls, single window with frosted glass. Coleman sat across from her. A younger agent, he introduced himself as Agent Mitchell, sat to the side with a notepad. "Let's start simply," Coleman said. "Tell me about your relationship with Captain Robert Morrison." "We met at a party several months ago. We spoke a few times at other social events. He seemed like a nice man." "Did he ever discuss his work with you?" "In general terms, nothing specific. He mentioned coordinating between military and manufacturers. That was all." Coleman opened a folder, pulled out a photograph. It showed her and Morrison at the Coconut Grove, dancing, her hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling. "This does not look like a casual acquaintance. We danced at a party. That is what people do at parties." "Captain Morrison died on November 20th. Overdose of sleeping pills combined with alcohol. His wife told investigators he had been depressed, drinking heavily, talking about work stress. She also mentioned he had been seeing someone, a blonde woman, German accent. Does that sound familiar?" Hildegard kept her voice steady. "If he was seeing someone, it was not me. I saw him socially, at public events. Nothing more." Coleman let that sit for a moment, then shifted direction. "Tell me about Commander James Reardon." And there it was. The real target. She had expected Morrison. But Reardon meant they had been watching more recently, watching closely enough to see the affair develop. "We met at David Selznick's party. We had dinner a few times." "How many times?" 4 or 5. "Try 8. We have surveillance logs. 8 dinners at various restaurants, plus 3 visits to his apartment in Santa Monica, plus 1 visit to your home on December 6th, the night before Pearl Harbor, where he stayed until morning." The room felt smaller suddenly. They had been following her. For how long? Weeks? Months? Every meeting, every careful contact, every moment she thought she was operating invisibly, they had been watching. "Commander Reardon was lonely," she said. "We became friends? Then more than friends. That is not a crime." "No," Coleman agreed. "But passing classified information to a foreign agent is, as is espionage, conspiracy against the United States, and treason." He pulled out more photographs. "This is you leaving the photography studio in Chinatown on November 30th. This is you meeting an unidentified man in Griffith Park on December 2nd. We have 12 similar meetings over the past 6 months, always the same man, always isolated locations. Want to tell me who he is?" Werner. They had photographs of Werner, which meant Werner had been compromised before his arrest, which meant the entire network had been penetrated at levels she had not imagined. "I do not know who that is," she said. "If someone sat near me in a park, that does not make them my associate." Mitchell spoke for the first time. "We found radio direction finding logs that show unauthorized transmissions originating from the Hollywood Hills on 17 separate occasions over the past 6 months. The signal triangulation puts the source within a quarter-mile radius of your home. Can you explain that? They had the transmissions, not the content. If they had broken the encryption, they would have arrested her already. But they had the signals, the timing, the location. They were tightening the noose one piece of evidence at a time. I cannot explain radio signals I know nothing about. Coleman leaned forward. Miss Walter, let me be direct. We believe you are part of a German intelligence network operating in Los Angeles. We believe you have been gathering and transmitting information about U.S. military capabilities to enemy forces. We believe you have exploited personal relationships with military and defense industry personnel to gain access to classified information. What we are offering you right now is a chance to cooperate before this goes to prosecution. Help us understand the network. Give us names. Tell us what you transmitted and to whom. Do that, and we can discuss options that do not involve a death sentence. Death sentence. The words hung in the air like smoke. They were not bluffing. Espionage during wartime carried capital punishment. They would execute her if they could prove it. I want a lawyer, she said. Coleman nodded, as if expecting that. That is your right. But understand that the moment you lawyer up, this conversation ends, and the next one happens in front of a federal grand jury. We will get subpoenas. We will tear apart every aspect of your life. We will interview everyone you have ever spoken to. And we will build a case that puts you in front of a firing squad. The only question is whether you help yourself now or wait until it is too late. I want a lawyer, she repeated. They kept her in the building for 6 more hours, moving her to a holding cell while they processed paperwork. It was psychological pressure, letting her sit alone with nothing but her thoughts and the growing realization of how much they knew. Finally, they released her with instructions not to leave Los Angeles and to make herself available for further questioning. She walked out into evening darkness, feeling the weight of surveillance like physical pressure. They were watching her now, following her car, monitoring her phone, waiting for her to make contact with other network members so they could roll up everyone at once. She drove home carefully, obeying every traffic law, taking no evasive maneuvers that might look like counter-surveillance. Inside her house, she did not turn on lights immediately. She sat in darkness, thinking through options. Run. The Canadian passport was still hidden. Mexico was still 2 hours away. She could abandon everything and disappear. But running now would confirm guilt, would trigger immediate arrest warrants, would mean living as a fugitive forever, looking over her shoulder. Never safe. Stay. Play innocent. Let them investigate and find nothing conclusive because she had destroyed the evidence. But they had photographs. They had surveillance logs. They had testimonies from people in the network who might trade information for leniency. She was trapped between 2 equally dangerous choices, and time was running out to make either one. The next morning they came with a warrant. 6 FBI agents, 2 police cars, official paperwork authorizing search of the premises. They were polite but thorough, spreading through her house like a methodical infection, touching everything, photographing everything, bagging items as evidence. She sat in her living room with a female agent watching her, listening to the sounds of her life being dismantled, drawers opening, floorboards being checked, walls being tapped for hollow spaces. One agent spent 20 minutes in her bedroom closet. She heard him moving clothes, tapping on panels, and her heart stopped. The hidden room. If he found the hidden room with the transmitter still inside, it was over. No lawyer could save her. No story could explain it away. She forced herself to breathe normally, to look bored rather than terrified. The female agent watching her made notes, documenting her reactions. Then a shout from upstairs. "Got something!" The agent emerged from her bedroom, carrying evidence bags. Not the transmitter, not the hidden room, but bad enough. The Minox camera, found hidden in a makeup case. Photographs of Boeing and Lockheed facilities, discovered behind a false back in a dresser drawer where she had missed them during her purge. The Canadian passport, with her photograph and a false name. Fragments of burned paper pulled from her fireplace, reconstructed enough to show code groups and cipher patterns. Coleman arrived within an hour, surveyed the evidence laid out on her dining room table, and turned to her with something like satisfaction. "Hildegard Walter, you are under arrest for espionage and conspiracy against the United States of America." They handcuffed her in her own living room, read her rights in a flat, bureaucratic monotone, led her out through her front door to the waiting cars, where neighbors had gathered to watch, shocked and horrified that the beautiful actress from the Hill was being arrested like a common criminal. Cameras flashed. A photographer from the Los Angeles Times had been tipped off, capturing the moment for tomorrow's front page. Nazi spy ring broken in Hollywood. She would be the face of betrayal, the symbol of enemy infiltration, the warning that danger lurked behind even the most beautiful facade. They took her to the Federal Detention Center, processed her like any other prisoner. Fingerprints, photographs, strip search, prison dress, cell with concrete walls and a metal cot. The transformation from Hollywood actress to federal prisoner took less than 2 hours. That night, lying on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, Hildegard finally allowed herself to feel what she had been suppressing. Not fear, not regret, but a strange kind of relief. The performance was over. The mask had finally cracked. She did not have to pretend anymore, did not have to smile and charm and seduce. The war she had been fighting in shadows was now public, and she could face it honestly. They thought they had broken her, thought the arrest and the evidence and the looming trial would make her desperate to cooperate. But they did not understand. She was not American. She had never been American, no matter what passport she carried. She was German. She was a soldier. And soldiers did not betray their country just because the battle turned against them. 2 days later, they brought her back to the interview room. Coleman and Mitchell, plus a federal prosecutor named Harrison, who laid out what they had. Physical evidence, surveillance photographs, testimony from Chen, who had been caught trying to flee to Mexico and agreed to cooperate. Testimony from other network members arrested in coordinated raids. Radio direction-finding logs correlated with known intelligence leaks, a pattern so clear and comprehensive that no jury would fail to convict. "You will be executed," Harrison said flatly. "That is not a threat or a negotiation tactic. That is legal fact. The evidence is overwhelming. Your only question is whether you die having helped your country, your adopted country, America, or whether you die loyal to a regime that abandoned you the moment you became inconvenient." "Germany did not abandon me," she said quietly. "I knew the risks. I accepted them. This is war. Sometimes soldiers are captured." "You are not a soldier," Coleman said. "You are a spy. There is a difference. Soldiers get prisoner of war treatment. Spies get trials and execution. Then execute me. Harrison leaned forward. We can offer you life imprisonment instead of death. Full cooperation, complete testimony about the network, names and methods and everything you transmitted. In exchange, we recommend life sentence instead of capital punishment. You would be in prison, but you would be alive. She looked at him for a long moment, looked at Coleman, looked at Mitchell with his notepad. They genuinely believed she would take the deal, believed that survival instinct would override ideology. No, she said. No. I will not cooperate. I will not testify against my country or my comrades. You have your evidence. Present it at trial. I will not help you. Coleman actually looked surprised. You understand what you're choosing? You are choosing death. I am choosing loyalty, something you would not understand because you have never had to make that choice. You were born American, safe and comfortable. I had to choose my country. I chose Germany, and I will die German rather than live as American. They tried for another hour. Threats, promises, appeals to logic and self-preservation. She refused everything. Finally, they gave up and sent her back to her cell. The trial would be a formality. The verdict was already certain. But she would face it without flinching, without begging, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her break. That night, in the darkness of her cell, she thought about her father in Munich and her brother on the Eastern Front and all the people who had believed in her mission. She thought about the 43 sailors on the Mariposa and the thousands more who would die before this war ended. She had killed some of them with information she provided, had contributed to their deaths as surely as if she pulled triggers herself, and she felt no guilt. They were the enemy. That was what war meant. But she also thought about James Reardon, alone and broken, facing court-martial because he had been human enough to need comfort. About Thomas Hendricks, drunk and lonely, used and discarded. About all the men she had manipulated with smiles and sympathy and promises she never meant to keep. Those deaths, those ruins, she could not claim they were just war. They were cruelty. They were exploitation. They were the price of victory, and she had paid it with other people's lives and souls. Tomorrow the newspapers would call her a monster, a traitor, the Nazi Mata Hari of Hollywood who had betrayed America's trust. They were not wrong, but she was also a soldier who had done what her country asked of her, who had fought a war in the only way women were allowed to fight, with beauty and lies and seduction. And she would die as a soldier, defiant, unbroken, loyal to the end. Outside her cell window, Los Angeles glittered in the darkness, the city that had welcomed her and trusted her and never suspected what she truly was until too late. She closed her eyes and waited for morning, when the machinery of justice would begin grinding toward its inevitable conclusion. The federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles had never seen anything like it. June 19th, 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, and the entire nation was hungry for revenge. The trial of Hildegard Walter gave them a target. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled 3 rows, pencils ready, cameras forbidden inside but waiting outside like vultures. Behind them sat military officers in uniform, defense industry executives, FBI agents, curious citizens who had won the lottery for public seating. The air was thick with heat and hatred. Hildegard sat at the defense table in a plain gray dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back severely. Her lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Arthur Brennan, looked nervous. He was 45, competent but not brilliant, and he knew this case was unwinnable. The best he could hope for was to keep her off death row. The prosecution table held 3 attorneys led by U.S. Attorney Harrison, the same man who had offered her the deal she refused. He looked confident. He had every right to be. All rise. Judge William Cartwright entered, black robes flowing, face stern and impassive. He was 62, a Hoover appointee, with a reputation for harsh sentences in espionage cases. The gallery rose as one, then settled again as Cartwright took his seat. The United States versus Hildegard Walter, the clerk intoned. Case number 42-371. Charges of espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, and violations of the Espionage Act of 1917. Cartwright looked at Hildegard directly. Miss Walter, you have been charged with serious crimes against the United States during a time of war. How do you plead? She stood, back straight, voice clear. Not guilty, Your Honor. A murmur ran through the gallery. Everyone knew she was guilty. The newspapers had printed the evidence for weeks, but the formality had to be observed. Be seated. Mr. Harrison, you may present your opening statement. Harrison rose, buttoned his jacket, and faced the jury. 12 men, women, were not serving on federal juries yet. All white, all middle-aged or older, all looking at Hildegard with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. Gentlemen of the jury, Harrison began, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. What you are about to hear is the story of the most dangerous kind of enemy. Not a soldier in uniform who fights openly and honorably, but a spy who smiles while gathering secrets, who seduces while serving a foreign power, who lived among us pretending friendship while working toward our destruction. He paced slowly, building rhythm. The defendant came to this country in 1936, claiming to be a refugee from Nazi Germany. She obtained work in Hollywood, attended parties, made friends among the wealthy and powerful. She seemed like the American dream personified. A beautiful woman escaping tyranny to build a new life in freedom. Harrison paused for effect. But it was all a lie. Hildegard Walter was never a refugee. She was an agent of the Abwehr, German military intelligence. She was sent here with one mission: to spy on American military and industrial capabilities and transmit that information to our enemies. And for 3 years, she did exactly that. He turned to point at Hildegard. She cultivated relationships with military officers. She seduced engineers from defense contractors. She photographed classified documents. She operated a shortwave radio transmitter from her home, sending encrypted messages to Germany. And the information she provided led directly to American deaths. The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. We will prove that intelligence transmitted by the defendant was used by Japanese naval forces to target the merchant vessel Mariposa, resulting in 43 deaths. We will prove that convoy schedules she stole were used to coordinate submarine attacks that sank 4 American ships and killed 117 sailors. We will prove that she was part of an espionage network that penetrated the highest levels of our defense establishment at the most critical moment in our nation's history. Harrison let that sink in, then softened his tone. The defendant is a beautiful woman. She is charming and educated, and she will try to make you sympathize with her. But do not be deceived. Beauty can hide poison. Charm can mask treason. What you must judge is not her appearance or her manner, but her actions. And her actions were the actions of an enemy agent who waged war against the United States while pretending to be our friend. He sat down. The jury looked grim. Hildegard kept her face neutral, but inside she felt the weight of those words. He had not exaggerated. Every accusation was true. Brennan stood for the defense opening. He looked uncomfortable, trying to find an angle where none existed. Gentlemen, the prosecution will present evidence that my client knew certain people and attended certain places. But knowing someone is not espionage. Attending parties is not treason. The prosecution will try to paint a picture of deliberate conspiracy based on circumstantial connections, but associations are not proof of intent. Miss Walter is a victim of overzealous investigation during a time of national paranoia. She is German by birth, yes, but that does not make her a spy. It was weak, and everyone knew it. The jury looked unconvinced. Cartwright looked bored. Harrison looked satisfied. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 days. They called 27 witnesses, each one adding another brick to the wall of evidence. Special Agent Coleman testified about the surveillance operation, the meetings in Griffith Park, the photography studio in Chinatown. He presented photographs, dates, times, a comprehensive timeline of suspicious activity. An expert from Naval Intelligence testified about the radio transmissions, explaining how direction-finding equipment had triangulated signals to the Hollywood Hills, how the timing matched intelligence leaks, how the encryption patterns matched known German military codes. Chen, the photographer, testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. He described developing her film, the images of classified documents, the courier system that moved intelligence from Los Angeles to San Francisco, to Tokyo, to Berlin. His testimony was devastating, confirming the entire network structure. Then came the victims. A Navy officer described the loss of the Mariposa, reading names of the 43 dead, showing photographs of young men who would never come home. He described how the ship had been following a classified route that appeared in one of Hildegard's transmissions, how the timing matched perfectly, how there was no other explanation for how the enemy knew where to strike. An admiral testified about the convoy attacks. 4 ships sunk because someone had leaked their schedules. 117 dead. He looked at Hildegard with pure hatred as he spoke, and the jury looked at her the same way. Thomas Hendricks testified, broken and ashamed. He described their relationship, how she had seemed interested in him, how he had shown her photographs of his work, how he had been so desperate for attention that he compromised security protocols. He wept on the stand. The prosecution treated him gently. The defense had no questions. The worst was James Reardon. He entered in handcuffs, wearing a prison uniform instead of his naval uniform. He had been court-martialed, convicted of negligent disclosure of classified information, dishonorably discharged, and sentenced to 10 years in military prison. His career was destroyed, his marriage was destroyed, his life was destroyed. He refused to look at Hildegard as he testified. His voice was flat, dead, reciting facts without emotion. Yes, he had discussed classified information with the defendant. Yes, he had brought documents to her home. Yes, he had believed she cared about him. Yes, he had been completely deceived. "Did you love her?" Harrison asked. Reardon finally looked at Hildegard, and the expression in his eyes was worse than hatred. It was emptiness. "I thought I did." But you cannot love someone who does not exist. Everything about her was a lie. I loved a character she played. The real person. I never knew her at all. When they let him out, he looked 20 years older than his 48 years. Hildegard watched him go and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel before. Not quite guilt, but recognition that she had destroyed a human being for no reason, except that he had information she needed. The physical evidence came next. The Minox camera, the photographs of defense installations, the Canadian passport, the code fragments reconstructed from her fireplace. Each item cataloged, authenticated, entered as evidence. Finally, on the third day, Harrison called his last witness, a cryptanalyst from Army intelligence who had broken some of the German codes. He testified that captured German intelligence summaries referenced an agent codenamed Valkyrie operating in Los Angeles. He presented decoded messages describing information about aircraft production, naval movements, convoy schedules, all matching intelligence that Hildegard had access to through her contacts. Can you definitively prove that the defendant is the agent codenamed Valkyrie? Harrison asked. The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. The timing, the content, the access, it all matches. Combined with the physical evidence and testimony, there is no reasonable doubt. Harrison rested his case. 3 days, 27 witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence. It was comprehensive, methodical, and absolutely damning. Brennan tried to mount a defense. He argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that associations did not prove espionage, that the cryptanalysis could not be definitively linked to his client. He called character witnesses, actors and studio employees who described Hildegard as friendly and professional and seemingly loyal. It was pathetic. The jury looked bored. Cartwright looked impatient. Even Hildegard knew it was hopeless. On the 4th day, Brennan made his last gamble. Your Honor, I call the defendant to testify in her own defense. It was risky. Putting a defendant on the stand opened her to cross-examination. But Brennan had nothing else. Maybe if the jury heard her speak, saw her humanity, they would hesitate before voting for death. Hildegard stood and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in. She sat, folded her hands, and looked at Brennan. Miss Walter, he began gently, please tell the jury about your background. Where were you born? Munich, Germany, 1913. And your family? My father was an industrialist. My mother was American, from Boston. I grew up between both countries, spent summers in Massachusetts, school years in Germany. I spoke both languages from childhood. Why did you come to America in 1936? Here was the moment. She could lie, could claim she had fled the Nazis, feared the coming war, wanted safety. Brennan was clearly hoping she would say that. Instead, she told the truth. I came because Germany sent me. I was recruited by the Abwehr in 1934 while studying drama in Berlin. They trained me for 2 years, then sent me here to gather intelligence on American military capabilities. The courtroom erupted. Brennan looked stricken. Cartwright banged his gavel. Order! Order in this court. Harrison was on his feet. Your Honor, the defendant just confessed. I am aware, Mr. Harrison. Sit down. Cartwright looked at Hildegard with something between shock and fascination. Miss Walter, you understand that you just confessed to espionage? Yes, Your Honor. I am guilty of everything the prosecution accused me of. I am a German intelligence officer. I conducted espionage operations against the United States. I transmitted classified information to my government. I did exactly what they say I did." Brennan was frantically trying to stop her. "Your Honor, I request a recess to consult with my client." "Denied." "Miss Valter, why are you confessing?" She looked directly at the jury. "Because I am tired of lies. I have spent 3 years pretending to be someone I am not. Pretending to be American, to love America, to care about American people. But it was all performance. I am German. I have always been German. I did my duty to my country, and I will not dishonor that duty by denying it now." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Harrison stood slowly. "Your Honor, I have questions for the defendant." "Proceed." Harrison approached the witness stand like a predator. "Miss Valter, you admit you are a German spy?" "Yes." "You admit you gathered classified intelligence and transmitted it to Germany?" "Yes." "You admit that information you provided was used to kill American servicemen?" She hesitated for just a moment, then answered, "Yes." "That was the purpose of the intelligence, to help Germany and its allies defeat American military forces. Do you feel any remorse for those deaths?" Another pause. This was the question that mattered. The human question. The one that might make the difference between life and death. She could lie. Could say yes. She regretted it. She had been misguided. She was sorry. It might save her life. But she had spent 3 years lying. She was done. "No," she said quietly. "I do not. They were enemy soldiers. I was at war with them. Soldiers die in war. That is the nature of conflict. Even Captain Morrison, who trusted you. Even Commander Reardon, who loved you. They gave me information that helped my country. I used them for that purpose. That is what intelligence officers do. If the situation were reversed, American agents would have done the same to Germans." Harrison pressed harder. "You feel no guilt at all? No shame? No regret for the lives you destroyed?" Hildegard looked at James Reardon sitting in the gallery, broken and empty. She looked at the photographs of the Mariposa victims. She looked at the jury, at their faces filled with rage and disgust. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel what she had suppressed. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. Recognition of cost. Understanding of what she had done not just to enemies but to human beings. "I regret," she said slowly, "that war requires such things. I regret that people like Commander Reardon, who are decent and honorable, become casualties of conflicts they did not start. But I do not regret serving my country. I do not regret doing what I was trained to do. If that makes me a monster in your eyes, then I am a monster. But I am a loyal monster." Harrison let that answer hang in the air, knowing it was more damaging than anything he could add. No further questions. Brennan had nothing on redirect. The damage was total. The prosecution and defense gave closing arguments, but they were formalities. The verdict was already written in the jury's faces. They deliberated for 47 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood and announced, "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." Hildegard stood for sentencing. Cartwright looked at her with something that might have been regret. "Hildegard Valter, you have been convicted of espionage against the United States during a time of war. The evidence against you was overwhelming, and your own confession removed all doubt. You have shown no remorse, no regret, no understanding of the gravity of your crimes." He paused, adjusted his glasses. This court recognizes only one appropriate sentence for such actions. You are hereby sentenced to death by firing squad, sentenced to be carried out at a federal facility within 90 days. May God have mercy on your soul." The gallery erupted in applause. Cartwright allowed it for a moment, then banged his gavel. "We are adjourned." They led her out in handcuffs. The photographers were waiting. Flashbulbs exploded as she walked to the prison transport vehicle. Someone shouted, "Nazi whore!" Someone else threw something that hit the side of the vehicle. She climbed into the back, still handcuffed, and sat on the metal bench as the doors closed. Through the small window, she could see Los Angeles streaming past. The city that had been her hunting ground for 3 years. The city she had betrayed. The city that would watch her die. Back in her cell that night, Hildegard lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling. 90 days, 3 months until execution, 3 months to wait for the firing squad that would end her life. She thought about her father, who would never know what happened to her. About her brother, who might be dead already on some frozen battlefield in Russia. About all the people she had killed with information and lies. She thought about James Reardon, destroyed because he had been human. About the 43 sailors on the Mariposa. About the hundreds of others whose deaths were linked to intelligence she provided. She had been a soldier. She had done her duty. She had served her country with every tool she possessed, and now she would die for it. The strange thing was the peace she felt. For 3 years, she had lived in constant tension, always performing, always hiding, always one mistake away from disaster. Now there was nothing left to hide. No more lies, no more masks, just the truth, stark and final. She was Hildegard Walter. She was a German intelligence officer. She had fought a war in the shadows, and she had lost. But she had fought, and she would die without apology, without begging, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Somewhere outside her window, Los Angeles slept. The city of dreams, the city of reinvention, the city where anyone could become anything. She had become a spy, a traitor, a killer, and in 90 days she would become a memory, a cautionary tale, a face in history books, warning that evil could hide behind beauty, and that enemies could smile while plotting destruction. She closed her eyes and waited for morning, for the countdown to begin, for the machinery of justice to grind toward its inevitable conclusion. The war would go on without her. Germany would probably lose. History would forget her name. But she had been loyal. She had been a soldier. She had served. And when they stood her against the wall and aimed their rifles at her heart, she would die as she had lived, defiant, unbroken, and true to the country that had sent her into the darkness and left her there to face the consequences alone.